Hello, my name is Susanne Evans and welcome to the Change Stories podcast. This is a podcast for people who are interested in creating change, whether that is within organisations or for individuals. In each podcast episode, I will have a conversation with someone about their work to share their story. Each story and conversation will provide you with ideas and inspiration for your own organisation or for you personally. To find out more about each episode, including further reading, and to share your change stories, go to www.changestories.co.uk. Hello and welcome to the Change Stories podcast. My guest today is Jennifer Bryan. Jennifer is a published author, TEDx and global speaker and managing director at Change and Leadership. She's worked with nearly 40 different organisations across multiple industries. She's also a vice president of the Association of Change Management Professionals UK. She has a passion for putting people at the heart of the decision-making room. She's developed a holistic approach to change and created a unique leading change framework, the ABChange model, and uses her commercial insight to help lead people in change. Jennifer is also author of Leading People in Change, a Practical Guide, and contributing chapter author in Managing Change During Unprecedented Times. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. It's fantastic to have this opportunity.
I very much enjoyed reading your book, and we will come on to lots more detail in that as we go along. One of the things that really leapt out of me was the last sentence of the book, where you say it's about people, not rocket science, which
yes.
I loved.
Yeah.
I think we know as practitioners, but I think leaders know too that people-centered change is important. But it seems to be, and I know your research has shown this too, that it's not always happening in organisations. So I just wanted to ask you what you have found from your own research about how people are using people-centered change. Are they using people-centered change? And if not, why not?
Yes. No. Well, the thing is, my experience has been that a lot of people, they know about it, as you say, they know that that's what they're supposed to be doing and whatnot, but then they end up not doing it. And so they talk a good talk, but they don't walk the walk from that standpoint. And there's a lot of different reasons why. And there are a couple of them from the research. It seems that people struggle to actually feel like they have sometimes the permission to go and talk to people outside of the project group, which is a bit bizarre to me as a change practitioner. I'm like, why wouldn't you? But they do struggle with that, and that's a genuine side of things. You know, if people don't feel that they can go and talk to people, then how are they ever going to actually do a people-centered change? So that was one of the big findings that we found. Also, the other big findings is people, they when they realize what all is involved in actually bringing people on board, sometimes they get a bit daunted by it. But also, more often than not, they realize they haven't factored that into their timelines of the project. And they go, we don't have time for that. We just have to get it out there. That particularly seems to happen, to be fair, with technology change, I must admit, because there's, usually that's being done in sprints and in an agile, and they're like, we've got to get this over the line. And, because the contract has been set up to do that. And they always thought they could bolt the people side of it on, not realizing that actually that needs to be integrated in to all of these sprints and so on and so forth. So it becomes sometimes about feeling there isn't the time, it hasn't been factored in from the get-go. It's and also they're feeling daunted by it, and then they also don't feel they have the permission to go and talk to others. So there are lots of other reasons, but those seem to be the real big key ones out there.
It's so interesting. I'm nodding along to everything that you were saying because I've worked on a few technology implementations, one quite current, and that kind of sprint mentality definitely is there really strongly. And it's almost like leading up to go live. Go live is like the thing that you've got to aim for. And I keep saying, and I have said multiple times in my career, but that's just the beginning. That's like, it's not the end, it's the beginning.
Exactly.
And I think it creates that mindset, doesn't it, of oh, we've got to do this 6-week sprint, and then at the end of it we've got another 6-week sprint, and that's the deliverable. And I've seen lots of change and comms teams on these sorts of programs focusing on communicating what they are doing, and that's the communication, you know, what we are doing in this 6-week sprint, rather than communicating, well, how is all this going to affect me as an employee, you know, Joe Blogg, how's my life going to change? That bit is not considered.
No, and then they are stunned and amazed when people aren't actually doing what they want them to do. And you're like, well, why would they?
Yeah, you haven't told them.
well, not only have you not told them, you haven't talked to them about it. You haven't actually said, you know, is this going to work for you? And if so, how can it work for you? You know, you haven't done anything with that. From that standpoint. I mean, I was working with an infrastructure organization a few years ago now, and they did exactly that, and they rolled this technology change out. And by the time I came on board, 9 months had gone by of this program, and loaded this. And I just happened to come on board when loaded the senior leaders were getting together, talk about what went well, what didn't go so well, what we're going to do next year, blah 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 blah. And they and one of the big frustrations, and people aren't doing what, you know, they aren't doing the things we need them to. They're not using the technology we've already put in place. So what assurance do we have they're going to do this other stuff and everything that they're planning? And I just went, well, hang on. Have you actually figured out why they should care? I mean, this all sounds great, but so what? You know, why should I use a lot of avatars? So one of my avatars is Maria in Brazil. And I go, why should Maria in Brazil care about this? What's the point? What difference does it make in her lives? And they just went, and they sat there and thought, and they talked about all the efficiencies and effectiveness. I'm like, yeah, that's management spiel. Yeah. Why does Maria need to care about that? What difference does this make in her life, in her working life, in her working day? And that's when the penny dropped. Like, oh, we hadn't thought of that. And you're like, that's, you know, unless you communicate that, and unless you actually work with people on that, they're not going to go and use it. You know, it's you know, you can see that even in the world of work. You go on LinkedIn at any point in time, you know, and how many different articles people are all about ChatGPT and so forth. And some people are like, oh, this is fantastic. This is amazing. Da, 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 da. And other people are going, oh my gosh, you have got to be kidding me. And this is scary. And then I think I forget who it was, and I should remember, because I think it was the most poignant thing said about ChatGPT and AI in general. And they said, if you don't use it, you are the one that's going to be behind, not everybody else. You've got to figure out how to integrate it into your life. Now, that's great, very, you know, great insight and so forth. But then the trick is to help people figure out, how do they integrate that into their life? How does that actually be something that's going to benefit them and help them in their work? Because unless you communicate that, people are going to continue to be polarized on, oh, this is fabulous, whizzy new tech, versus those are like, this is the scariest thing ever. This is going to put me out of a job. This is going to da-da-da-da, which is no different to any other technology that we've done. Computers came on board, and suddenly we've got them in our house. Oh, that's going to get rid of my job. It's not, you know, so it's all part of that same story. And the answer to helping people on the journey or on the story, however you want to phrase change, and actually be involved in it, is to actually look at how that's going to help them.
It's so, yeah, I absolutely agree. And actually, it's another quote that I took from your book, which I like very much, about the change is a journey, a story. How do you want to travel, and what story do you want to share? And I think that's the key to it, is telling people in the organization and outside, if necessary, what is going to happen in a way that they can understand. And it isn't management speak. You know, I had a conversation with somebody only yesterday about a merger communication, and the board was about to do their communication, and they just asked for a bit of advice. And I just said, don't talk about how great this is going to be for the company or for the directors or for the industry or anything else. Just talk about it from the sense of, Joe Blogs sitting in the room listening to the presentation. What does this mean to them? That's what they're interested in. They couldn't care less what it means for the company and it's against competitors and blah blah blah. They just want to know, how is this going to affect me and how is my life going to change? And that's what you need to focus on. And ask questions. Don't just tell them stuff. Ask them some questions too, and give them the chance to be part of a two-way communication.
That's exactly it. That's exactly. I mean, how many times when we've been, let's face it, management training, leadership training is not a new concept. We've been doing it for several decades. And how many times in that management training we keep talking about the WIFM, the WIFM, the WIFM. Yeah. Everybody knows what the WIFM is. You don't even have to go into it anymore because everybody knows what it's all about. That hasn't changed, That's what people need to know. And it's not because that we don't care about the company or we don't care about the other things. It's just that's our human nature. All you have to do is look at a 2-year-old and they go, well, why is the sky blue? Why is the grass? Why? And they're only going to be looking at it from their perspective as well. Babies are the most selfish people on the planet. They don't care about the mom. Just give me the food. Just change my nappy. And it's not about that. It's just that's in our DNA as a human being. And if it's just understanding that and going, it's okay. We can, we just need to actually talk to each other. Have the conversation. And people need to feel as if it's a conversation, not a dictation.
Yes. I talk constantly about advocacy versus inquiry, that there's so much advocacy in change comms about trying to persuade people this is a good idea, rather than actually inquiring what are the issues that you face in your job and how can this thing help you with those issues.
Exactly. And the thing is, people many times, I mean, there's 7 different reasons why they resist. And I go into that in the book as well. But more often than not, it's just because how it's been communicated or how it's been perceived and whatnot. And if you just, the number of times I've sat in a room and people are really scared of whatever this particular change is. We have that conversation. What are your fears? And let's get it all out there and all on the board. And I say, okay, what can we do to actually deal with that? And I just open it up to the room. I don't even give them the answers. They're giving themselves the answers and their colleagues are giving themselves. And they're like, oh, but actually, Joe, when you did this, and because they know. But until you have that conversation, they're not going to, it's not going to open all of that up and enable that level of thinking.
And I wonder if that goes back to what you said earlier about permission. So it's giving people that permission to contribute and to be part of the change rather than change being done to them. And that can be quite a shift sometimes, can't it, in some organizations?
It could be a huge, huge shift. And I think one of the big things that I thought was a given, to be perfectly honest, and I've realized it's not, and I think it's very, very important, is for any project team to realize that they can't work just as a project team. They've got to, and they have to expand out their stakeholder mapping and analysis to a much wider audience, because at some point, if it's a technology change, for example, at some point, they're going to need to talk to some people in HR. They're going to need to talk to someone about processes. They're going to need to talk to the internal comms team. They're going to need to actually work with a much wider group of people. And so they, are they going to have to do that every day? Probably not. Or there might be somebody in the team that does need to do it every day. But you've got to look at that and broaden out that perspective more. If you just work in the vacuum, then it's no wonder that at the end of the day, you're preaching to the converted already because you're all on board with it one way or another. So you're not going to get any further than that vacuum unless you expand out from an understanding and a stakeholder's perspective, because then you can start to branch out and start to take a look at what all else is going on there.
And I think I'm wondering if you've experienced this too. There's a cautiousness sometimes, I think, on projects to broaden the communication, the circle of trust too widely,
Yes.
because people, leaders are worried about information getting out, or they want to be certain of everything before they start communicating. And I think that creates this tension between wanting to be open and wanting to be people centered, but then not wanting to reveal too much before they're ready. And I think every project I've ever worked on, there's always been a tension there.
Yeah.
And I think it's about enabling project teams and leaders to feel confident in the unknown, and that it's okay not to know.
Yes, I agree with you there, but I think it's more fundamental than that. I think it's a mindset shift for leaders and managers to go from feeling they've got to be the guru of all information, and instead of that, actually start to be the experimenter and approach people saying, we don't have all the answers. We'd like to explore what this could look like. What are your thoughts? Do you think it's feasible? Do you don't think it's feasible? Do you think, yeah, but only if it's done this way? Or it could, but only if this? Or actually, you go down that road and you're going to destroy all of that. Or what? Or actually, I think that's a big waste of time because we've got something similar. So why bother making this investment? Go out and be. I would actually really like to see leaders and managers be more of an experimenter rather than feeling they have got to be the guru of all information.
I love that. Wouldn't that be great if that was like the standard practice?
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
It's one of the things I really liked about your model in your book was this idea of asking the right questions before you start. Because I think, again, too often, and I think it comes with lean and agile and sprint and all of these things, it's like moving forward, constant forward motion, rather than spending a bit of time at the start of a project or key points in the project to kind of sit down and go, what are we trying to do here? What's the problem we're trying to solve? And I love the fact that in your model that there's a whole chunk of time spent asking those questions before you even start. I wonder, with your experience, is that something that leaders are happy to do, or is that something that they resist because it makes them feel a bit uncomfortable, or they want to get going? What's your experience of encouraging people to take the time to do that?
Both. So it sometimes can be a real sell in, but usually if I've been brought in, that hard sells, to be honest, is kind of done because they've bought me as opposed to somebody else. And because I'm very upfront right from the get-go, I focus on the people side of change. And I said, I am going to ask the tough questions because I'm going to be their advocate and your advocate. But I want to make sure you're in the right place in order for us to be the right advocate here. And so if they've brought me in many times, that's the case. But that's if the leaders brought me in. The challenge is when, and this is more often than not, third-party suppliers brought me in, said we need Jennifer on this, but it hasn't been sold into the leaders. So when that's the situation, and the way I really try and help them through that, say, well, how much money do you want to spend on this? And they go, well, we this is our budget. This is what we want to spend. I said, okay, well, what's going to happen if that doubles? And they said, well, why would it double? I said, because you don't do it right the first time. So you have to do it again. And they go, we can't do that. I said, okay, so let's get it right first time. And they're like, yeah, let's. and you're like, okay, so in order for us to get it right first time, this is what we need to do. Really? Yes. Yes, this is what we need to do. Because I can tell you a whole bunch of examples of when they've thought they could skip these steps, and then guess what? They end up paying maybe not always double, but it's certainly at least half that. And sometimes it's more than double.
Yes.
And they're like, oh, okay. And so that's so when you hit the money, I find that's quite a good influencer.
Yeah, I would say so. And you're absolutely right in that taking that time is
Mm.
worth doing. And although I think I've experienced it, I'm sure you have too, that kind of, well, can we just get going? Can we just get going? Well, yeah, we can, but we need to do this first.
Yes.
But it's worth it in the long
Mm.
run because although it might feel like it takes longer, it's just the end result is so much better.
Yeah.
And I don't actually think it takes that much longer. I think it's just a different way of doing things.
It is. And you sit there, and if there's a real pinch, if people are really talking about time, so they're not as worried at this point about the money, it's time, 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 time. And that's the other thing. I say, all right, what do you feel has to happen within this time? And I say, all right, we're going to double up then. We're going to do that. But whilst we're talking to Joe Blogs and getting this information, we're also going to add in these questions and explore all of this and see where they're coming from. And so then we're in the same amount of time and we're killing what, and then I say from their perspective, I say, so we're killing two birds with one stone.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, okay, all right, that sounds reasonable. So there's a couple of ways in which I try and maneuver. It doesn't, but it's also very dependent, to be perfectly honest. It sounds all fabulous and rosy and as if I'm always in the room. I'm not.
Mm.
And there's a big difference if I can be in the room and talk to people about this. And if someone else who isn't aware of this and they're the person that's in there trying to influence. And that's actually one of, I would say, the biggest frustrations for me as a change practitioner. And when I talk to a lot of other change practitioners as well, is that, you know, it's about getting into the actual decision-making room.
Yeah.
So we can do this hard questioning, challenging, and also in some ways, very simple solutioning around some of the challenges and resistance. So that's actually one thing. It'd be great if that could happen a lot more often because we'll be able to circumvent and deal with things a lot quicker, a lot easier, and a lot more seamlessly for leaders. We'll be able to make their lives easier, to be perfectly honest, and all of their teams' lives easier.
Yeah, I agree. I think sometimes the change professional isn't always in the room, as you say, when some key decisions are made, and it's then left to that person or people to implement without being part of that decision-making process and without having, because, you know, the conversations and questions that you're talking about, they need to happen at all levels, don't they? It's not just,
they do.
You know, at leadership level, it's right the way through the organization so that people can feel engaged and understood and have had the chance to talk about the change and why it's happening. That's all through the organization.
Yeah, no, exactly that. And it's just, I mean, we all know many times when an organization is going to be embarking on a change, more often than not, it gets decided in a boardroom, oh, we need to do this because of X, Y, Z. All right, John, go figure out how we do X. John goes off into his room and he pulls up all the plan, next board meeting comes in, this is what we could do, this is how much it's going to cost, and and everybody goes yay or nay, and then it's like, right, now roll out. And it's like, hang on, have you actually found out, you know, what's going on, why you're doing this, and what impact that's going to have? Have you asked people what, you know, is this something that they actually need? Are they gagging for it? Or are they totally against it and think it's a complete waste of time? Or do they have just so much on their plate that that's just one more thing that's going to literally, they're going to fall over now?
Yeah.
So it's and I think there's three key questions that I think need to be asked, and it's what I ask whenever I am meeting up with a potential client, and that is, what's really driving this change? Genuinely, what's really behind all of this? And that usually takes a bit of unpicking to get to that root element. The next question I like to ask is, why are you doing it now versus 6 months ago or in 6 months' time? Why now? And then thirdly, how do you think people are going to feel about it? And it's those three key questions. And if those can be asked before any decision is made to green light any project, and that's actually asked at the forefront, there's a lot of answers to questions that people have about it in that boardroom immediately get answered.
I love
from
that.
those three questions.
I love it. It's so simple, but so insightful, and gets to the core actually of what you need to understand before you go down that road. Because, we all know sometimes change is not done for the right reason. It's done because the chief exec thinks it's a good idea rather than any particular need in the business. So I think, goodness, that would be amazing if that could just become part of the agenda for any of these sorts of discussion.
Exactly. And, sometimes change has to happen because, the system is actually dead tech, and hence there's got to be an upgrade from that standpoint. And sometimes, and that's what's driving it. And you're like, that's fine. That's fair enough. It's dead tech. You're not going to continue using dead tech. You wouldn't do it in your own home. So why do it in the workplace? You need something new. So whilst you're trying to figure out what that new is, let's go and see, well, what is it with the current tech that works for people and what doesn't work, and what would people like to see differently? And then that can help you decide which system to use. But so often they sit there and they feel, oh, well, they get all that, they just put an RFP out and have people come back with the systems, right? That's the one that suits us, we think, best because it's cheaper or whatever, and we'll go down that road. And then they find out later, once they're doing all the specs and the requirements and they're trying to marry things up, oh gosh, this isn't going to work, or oh, now we have to do this workaround and that workaround and that workaround. You're just like, yeah, if you just asked the question first, you wouldn't really be in this situation. And halfway down, and now you've spent $500,000, and you're committed to another $1.5 million with this. You're not going to be able to get out of it because there's penalties for coming out of this contract, and you're just like, so you're looking at spending $2 million on a system that's actually not going to do what really it's not actually going to really do what you would have liked it to do.
And I feel like as well, that question and the use of the questions, it leads to a level of honesty about what's happening, because I've experienced this on programs myself when a system is being introduced because of the old system no longer works or is not being continued. But the new system is sold as like the cure for the world's problems, whereas actually it's just a replacement of a system that's obsolete. And we should be more honest about these sorts of changes. Treat employees like adults. I mean, it's a conversation I constantly have. They are grown-ups. Treat them like grown-ups. Be honest about why you're doing this thing. If you're doing it because actually it's going to make a massive difference to their lives, tell them that. If you're doing it because the system's obsolete and you have to replace it, tell them that. Manage expectations. And I think those questions being asked right at the beginning creates that level of honesty in the room, which can then be used in the way that it's communicated to employees.
That's exactly it. So many people I find they're scared and they're pussyfooting around, people, and, oh, we don't want to talk because they'll resist. And I'm like, so what if they resist? I said, of course there's going to resist. I said, everybody's going to resist. Even you resisted probably in the very beginning and went, well, why are we doing that? That's a resistance, message, so it's fine. Don't worry about it. People are that's human. The point is we need to actually understand where it's coming from and how people are going to do it so that we can manage it. The fact that people are going to resist, that's not the problem. The thing is we need to know where that's coming from and how we're going to manage that, because if you can sit there and say to everybody, right, you're all going to get £1 million because we won the lottery and we've done da 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 da, and people are going to go, yeah, right. That's resistance. So what are you going to do with it? So what? People are going to resist. That's natural. What are you going to do with it? That's the point.
Yes, I so agree. And when I read that in your book, I was just wholeheartedly agreed with it, that there's this enormous fear of resistance, emotion, with anything that's different. And it holds organizations back, and it holds
Oh
leaders
yeah.
back from being authentic and truthful. Because what's the worst that's going to happen? Someone will be
Mm.
cross and won't like what you're saying. Well, I mean, can you survive that? Yes. What
Hmm.
do you do with that once you've seen it? But it feels to me sometimes like you just don't even want to get to the point where they see any resistance. They want to push it all down and pretend it's not there. And it's not
Exactly.
healthy or normal,
No.
because organizations are made of humans, exactly as you say, and a
Mm.
human reaction to anything different and new is to be suspicious. It's how we've
Yeah.
survived for this long.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. I mean, I'm going back to to the 2-year-old scenario when anyone who's had kids and you said, right, you have to go and brush your teeth. Well, why do I have to go brush my teeth? You know, you've got to explain, well, because the health, da, 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 da. There's nothing different to that in business. If we just be as human as we are at home with our friends and our families and in our lives, and we bring that to the office rather than feeling like we have to be something else. You just sit there and cut through all the other crap. People are like, okay, well, at least they heard me. At least
Yes.
they heard my question and they've answered the question. I don't like the answer, but they've heard it and they've answered it. I can't ask for really too much more than that.
Personally, I would rather I say something and someone responds than
Yes.
I say something and there's just nothing. Because
Yeah.
if there's nothing, there's no response, there's no two-way in any
Mm,
communication at all in organizations, but particularly around change, then you don't know. You have no idea.
hmm
Did they
Yeah.
understand it? Do they like it? Do they not like it? I would far rather somebody asked a question,
Mm,
um, wanted more detail, was picking it apart a little bit, because to me that's not necessarily that someone doesn't like it. They want to know more, and
hmm
that's good. I'd rather that
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
just,
They're
you know,
engaged. They're like,
exactly,
hurrah.
rather than
Um, you,
tumbleweed. You don't just want
exactly.
as a
Oh,
CEO to be standing there like doing your thing, and then you any questions and everyone just sits there. No,
yeah.
that's what you should get it. I wonder if you've got a view, because I don't know the answer to this, but I wonder if you have a view on how do we get leaders, change professionals to be more comfortable with that state of not seeing resistance as a problem.
I think it's about recognizing that people are human and recognizing that what people are doing and how they're doing it in the workplace when it comes to resistance is the exact same as to how we face it in all the other elements of our life from that standpoint. So so I think the big thing is to stop feeling like because you're at work, you're a different person
Mm,
and everybody else is a different person. People are just people,
mm.
everywhere we go. There is once upon a time, and I wrote an article back in 2014, and it's more blood now because after the pandemic and so forth, but there's still this element where we have a work face versus the then personal face of ourselves. And when we all remember on the BBC interview when the child came in, and when the cats come in, and I celebrated that. I went, yes, fantastic. Now we're being human, there, and we're all going, you know what, it's okay. But there's an element of that where we excused it. We all decided, oh, well, it's because we're all working from home and it's the pandemic. Well, that's fine. We'll let that go. But now we're starting to revert back, going, no, now we're back into the professional sphere. And we have to be like this. And instead of like this, oh crap, I just dropped my water and hold on a second, and whatever it may be. And yeah, I just think it's about recognizing we're all human and we're all just gonna be human. about things instead of feeling we've got to be perfect, gurus of all information, this perfection look of that sits on glamour or something, whatever it may be. It's we're just people, and we're doing the best that we can in the circumstance in which we're doing it. And sometimes we're going to get it right, sometimes we're going to get it wrong, sometimes we're not going to know, and sometimes we're going to feel we know it all and we got to go down this road, and it's that's just all part of it.
Yeah, I agree. And I was thinking while you were talking, that idea of knowing it all, I think that's part of the problem. So that
Yes.
when you're working on a change team, or you're a leader in an organization, you're so far along the journey of change that it's hard then to recognize that the people you're communicating with are not at that point, because they haven't been privy to the information.
Yeah.
So I think there's that kind of recognition that when you've been doing this for 6 months, say, and then you're just starting to talk about it to the organization, they are 6 months behind you in terms of understanding. But also, I think, and I recognize this in myself too, as a change professional, you get quite protective of the work that you've been doing, and that you think it's all brilliant and marvelous. And then when someone starts questioning it can feel quite personal. And I think from my own experience, I've had to learn to step back a bit from it and recognize that any question or criticism of the change is not me. It's not a criticism of me. It's a reflection of how they feel about what's happening, why it's happening, how it's happening. But, going back to your questions that you said, what is this thing we're doing? Why are we doing it now? And what's the point of it? Why are we doing this? And I think it's for me, that's really helped, taking that step back and just recognizing, okay, exactly as you said, this is just human. It's normal. They're asking questions. They're being negative about it. That's okay. It's not me. It's not what I've done. It's the thing that's happening. And as a change professional, that can be quite helpful to sort of step back from it a bit and recognize that.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, when I use what's called, and I talk a bit about this, that in-person and mind approach, understanding what's going on in their head. And I think, and that takes, it's challenging sometimes, especially when something is happening right here. But if you can stop, I always say, stop, breathe, and just listen. Just stop for a minute, take a breath, and go, okay, interesting you're saying that. Tell me more. Where is that coming from for you? Rather than being on the defense, just go. But we have to stop and breathe in order to put ourselves into that space where we can ask that question. Because as you said, it may not be anything to do with whatever it is that's actually going on. It may be actually that there's a lot of other stuff happening in that person's world, and they've got a lot of other things going on. And this is just one more thing, and it's sent them over the edge from that standpoint. And if they have that moment to be able to then you ask that question, and they're able to feel as if you're A, genuinely asking the question, but B, answering it. And maybe they're like, you might end up with someone who starts breaking down because there's other things going on, and this was just one more thing. And they're going, actually, it's all fine. It's fine, and I'll be fine. But I just needed to understand, and it's all okay. I think it's taking that moment, and it's hard to do. I don't always do it. I'm not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I also know that when I do, it's a much more powerful and impactful and insightful moment than when I don't.
Well, as we're all human, as you say, so we don't always get it right. But that for me is one of the most powerful questions. Just tell me more. The temptation to respond, to say something, to give your own view of the world is massive. Yeah. Actually, if you're uncertain of how to respond, tell me more is a really good question.
It is. No, it really is. When you're like, oh, I hadn't even, what, blink, 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 blink. Ah, tell me more.
It should be in every change person's repertoire, that one.
Exactly, exactly. No,
So,
completely.
tell me more. I'm going to use your question about. I think we've covered a lot of the aspects of your model, the AB change model, in our conversation. But just for the benefit of listeners who may not have seen it, what is in your model, and how do you encourage leaders in organizations to use it?
Right. So, the A/B change model is actually part of the holistic approach. It's a piece of it on that leading change element. The bit that needs to happen is before that. So as part of the holistic approach is really understanding, first of all, what is it that people want to do? What's the vision of the change? That's the first step. And then when you are looking at that, it's about then looking at the internal and external influencing factors around that. And as you said, because you don't want to negate that side of things, because a change that has nothing, an element that has nothing to do, you could argue, with your change or your organization, could have major influence on your organization and the change. The war in Ukraine, when that first kicked off, there's a lot of organizations that had to suddenly deal with all of that's going on. The pandemic, another one, and all the rest of it. And that it had no influence on that. But we had to figure that one out. So understanding these different things going on really helps us actually go, okay, let's take a look at that. What does that mean? What's that about? Da, da, da. Once you've done all of that, that also then helps with the very first step of the AB change model, which is identifying the type of change that you're dealing with, and that really streams down to 6 different types from that standpoint. Now, the big kind of pitfall that a lot of people have is there's 2 of them. One is they first say, "Oh, well, it's this change, it's this type, and this type," and like, but what is it actually? What are you really looking to do? Let's get to the root of all this. All right, so you're putting in a new technology system. What's driving that? What's that about? Is what's going on? Is that about just improving how you operate? Okay, so then it's an improvement type of change, for example. Because once you get that answer to that question, the model does the rest for you. It tells you this is the leadership style you need to be demonstrating. This is the most important change skill you need to be demonstrating. And here's all the others in order of importance. And it also states, by the way, if you focus on 80% of your time on the least important skill rather than the most important, it's going to go horribly wrong. So the first pitfall is to really challenge, to drive down what it is, that single type of change. This is really at the core of what you're trying to do. That's the first one. The other pitfall many times people do is they'll look at the framework, and because every manager, every leader has typically a preferred leadership style and one that they feel the most home with. And so because the framework is set up as a table in that way, people go, they'll look at the leadership style. It's like, oh, that's my one. So therefore, it's got to be this type of change. And you're like, no, no. It's about the type of change that drives the leadership style you need to demonstrate, not the leadership style for the change. It's like, and as a result of that, they end up doing the wrong things because they're looking at what it is they want to do before they're looking at what it is they are doing. And so, yes, it's step A, type of change, then the leadership style, not I prefer that leadership style, therefore it's this type of change.
I love that. Everyone's always looking for a shortcut, aren't they? Like
they are. And those are the 2 big pitfalls. Oh, well, it's 3 of these. No, it's not. There will be other changes underneath this overarching change, because you put in a system change, and let's say it is an improvement. It's an improvement for the organization. That's the overarching change. But we all know there's within an organization, there's a load of subcultures, and the impact of that is going to be different for all these subcultures and the different teams and different things going on. When you're looking at a corporate real estate workplace change and you're going into a hybrid way of working, the traders that's one type of change for them versus the marketing team. It's different for all of these different subcultures within an organization. So it's about understanding what's the driver for that overarching change as an organization. But then once you get that, underneath that, there's going to be all these the same change is going to be different for all these other different subcultures. And that's where you get the different elements.
Yeah, and I think you're right. That's, for me, is something that organisations get wrong sometimes. It's the idea that this change is going to be experienced and will impact exactly the same across the whole organisation. So they're going to take the same approach to everything across the whole organisation. And of course, it just doesn't work, because it's different for different people. And while, it would be lovely to be able to do individualized change and all of that, you can't, but you do have to recognize that different bits of the business will be impacted in different ways, but based on how the change is going to affect them, the size of the change, but also where they're coming from, like where they are now, where their culture is at the moment, and what shift that represents. And one of my bugbears is, let's send everyone on a change management course to help them cope. No, it's not going to work, because it's different. It's different for everybody.
Exactly. I mean, how wonderful it would be if we sent out to this email, and it's the one email, and everybody looked at it, and everybody read it, and everybody digested it. I mean, that would be so easy and fabulous. They're like, yeah, and you're whistling Dixie, mate. That there's no way on this planet that's going to happen. So, and that's just the way it is. So we've got to look at all of these different ways, and we've got to send an email. We've got to put it on the internet. We've got to do a news item. We've got to make sure it's in all the team briefings. We've got to blip, 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 because people are different. We're not the same.
They are.
We will take in information differently at different times, under different circumstances, all of that. And it's just bringing that human element to the fore, and remembering we're human, we're not robots. So therefore there is going to need to be nuance in all of this.
I think that's a wonderful place for us to stop, because we're running out of time, but it's been so wonderful talking to you. And I wholeheartedly agree. I would recommend your book, people, to have a look. It's a really good read. If people want to find out more about you and your work, where's the best place for them to take a look?
So the best place is, I'm on LinkedIn every day, several times a day, not on the weekends. I do try to put that work-life balance in, but they can reach out to me on LinkedIn, Jennifer L. Bryan, because there are a few Jennifer Bryans out there in the world. So it's Jennifer L. Bryan, and they can reach out to me there as well. And that's also my website, jenniferlbryan.com. So either way, I would be happy to hear from everybody. It'd be fantastic.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And thank you for being my guest today. I've really enjoyed talking to you. It's been an absolute blast.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Susanne. This has been fun. This has been really good fun.
I'm glad you enjoyed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Change Stories podcast. I love this conversation, and I hope you did too. Thanks as ever to my wonderful guests, and to Pete Morgan at Monkey Pants Productions for making the podcast sound amazing. If you want to find out more about this or any other episodes of Change Stories, go to www.changestories.co.uk, where you will find all the episodes and show notes. If you have enjoyed listening, please rate and review the Change Stories podcast on your podcast listening platform. And do please let me know if you have ideas or requests for future episodes. You can contact me and find out more about change and storytelling on my website, www.feldsparconsulting.com. Thanks again for joining in with the Change Stories conversation.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.